All right, y'all, welcome to the show. So today I have a bunch of good news for you, actually. So we're going to discuss a poll a little later on, which is astonishing. I never in my life did I think I would see a poll that is this conclusive and definitive on the issue of gay marriage, particularly at the same time Republicans have now ramped up attacks on various members of the LGBTQ community. We now have even most religious people are supportive of gay marriage. So we'll talk about that. We also have Trump continuing with this New York fraud case. He was in the courtroom, and then when he's in the courtroom, he doesn't say anything. The second he gets out, he looks for the cameras, and he absolutely goes buck wild. So we'll talk about that. And then later on in the show, I have for you the biggest healthcare worker strike in U.S. history. This is a huge deal. I think labor is really, really reinvigorated in this country. And honestly, you love to see it. And then also later on in the show, we'll talk about a disturbing poll. Young people, apparently a majority of young people now have mental health issues. So I'll get into the specifics and everything, but it's kind of astonishing, right? A majority of young people, you would think that when somebody's young, it's like, you don't have all the scar tissue and you don't have all the failures from experience and you'd be like happier, but doesn't look like that. Doesn't look like that at all. So everybody do me a big favor, click subscribe and all that fun stuff. Click like, bell icon, yada, yada. Support the show on Patreon. You guys know the drill. Okay, let's dive into it here. So Trump was at his New York fraud trial. And when he was in the courtroom, he wasn't saying much. The second he got out of the courtroom, he, of course, opened his big mouth. And look, Trump is a lawyer's worst nightmare. Why? Because he's not going to listen to you. Any half-decent lawyer would tell Trump, hey, dog, why don't you go ahead and shut up? Because he talks himself into a corner. He contradicts himself from day to day. And these are all things that can and will be used against you in the courtroom. And I know that all of his actual good attorneys told him, hey, you got to stop talking about this. And he just can't help himself. He just cannot help himself. So now, not only does he not have any good lawyers because they don't listen to him, but also he stiffs them. There's been a lot of detailed reporting on this. He doesn't pay his lawyers. Like, some of them are literally suing him because they haven't paid him. So now, listen, he's at the bottom of the barrel when it comes to the lawyers that he's using. We'll have a story a little later on about Alina Habba, who's his current lawyer, and just how insanely incompetent she is. But let's dive into this. So he gets out of the courtroom, and yet again, this is Trump accidentally giving the game away and basically admitting to the crime without realizing it.
There's absolutely no fraud. They all made money. They're all happy, 100% happy. And I think very importantly is everything, many, many warnings, page 1, page 2, and many pages. It says, please, you must understand that you have to do your own due diligence and you have to, above all, do your own research and analysis. Do not rely on anything. Do not rely on the financial statement. Also, the financial statements are very strong in terms of cash, liquidity, and everything else. This case is a scam. There can't be fraud when you've told institutions to do their own work. This case is a fraud, and it's a scam. Thank you very much.
What is incredibly ironic, of course, is that he's doing projection. He's saying that the case is a fraud and a scam when he is literally in court because he did fraud. So his argument there was, oh, you can't trust my financial statements. Of course you can't trust my financial statements. And he tries to weasel out of it by saying, look, there was a disclaimer, right? It said like, hey, here's our assessment, but also totally disregard and ignore this assessment, man. No, that's not going to work. You are not going to get away with that. And what's interesting is, this is the best argument you think you have? This is the best argument. Now, it's funny because on Twitter, you had like Don Jr. and Eric and a bunch of idiots on the far right trying to make the argument like, this is ridiculous because the judge said that Mar-a-Lago's worth $18 million and that's how you know he's lying and you know it's a witch hunt. That property's worth hundreds of millions of dollars. But what they didn't tell you is the 18 million number that was cited by the judge is not his own assessment. It was the assessment of the Trump family when they wanted to pay low taxes on Mar-a-Lago. They said it's worth $18 million. And this is his problem. See, he knows he can't get away with doing that like $18 million totally skewed fact in the courtroom because they know the genesis of where that number came from. They know the judge didn't pull it out of his ass. They know all that stuff. And so what's his best argument he thinks he has? Listen, it can't be fraud if I'm warning you in the report that this might be fraudulent. Come on, man. Come on. Look, we've gone through the specifics, but just to give you some idea as to how egregious all of this was. Trump listed his own apartment in New York as 30,000 square feet. Guess what? It's 11,000 square feet. When it comes to Mar-a-Lago, the maximum amount that it's worth would be $75 million, and they reported it at one time at least as $739 million. Now you have Trump saying it's worth $1 billion. At one point, one of the Trump people said it was like $1.5 billion or whatever. They're also just lying because they know they're comparing it to other properties. But what they don't tell you is this is a severely restricted property in terms of what you can do with the land. There's rules around it. It has to remain a club. Also, there's some high percentage, almost up to 30%, I think. If you were to sell Mar-a-Lago, that gets reinvested into some government agency in Florida for conservation or something like that. So, like, all this stuff is known. All this stuff is on the record. Anybody who actually read through the claims against Trump would know all this stuff, right? I went through a lot of the specifics and the details on it. And what I was amazed by is the specificity and the nuance and the incredible detail that was laid out in this report by Letitia James. I think it's like 280 pages. And they just rip them to shreds in 1,000 different ways. Look, the bottom line is he committed bank fraud. He committed insurance fraud. On the one hand, he would report his properties as being worth very little so that they can pay low taxes. But then when they were trying to get a good deal from a bank or an insurance company with favorable terms, they would massively inflate their own assets. And there was even an instance like his DC hotel, for example, where he borrowed a bunch of money. I forget which bank it was from. Was this one Deutsche Bank? I don't remember. But he borrowed a bunch of money from a bank and sold his property. And he was lying every step of the way about how much it's worth, and he was able to get good terms as a result of how much he was inflating his worth. And then he ended up net profiting $100 million off of the sale of his DC post office. And dude, so all that money was gotten through fraud. And so this is like, for him, this is a nightmare scenario for this very simple reason. He was caught red-handed. He knows he was caught red-handed. And now he's losing his business certificates in New York, which means he doesn't have a business license in New York anymore. He can't do business in the state of New York, where he's freaking headquartered. Okay, so that's a death blow. And then now he's looking at up to a $250 million fine, which he absolutely cannot afford. Right? So what happens? Well, there's going to be like an independent judge who's appointed to oversee all of the Trump properties and assets, and they're going to have to liquidate it. So even though this is the civil case, it's not a criminal case, and for that reason, many people sort of poo-poo it and downplay it. The fact of the matter is, when you go through the specifics of the civil case, this is just as damaging, if not more so, than the criminal cases. Because, I mean, think about it. If you lose your ability to do business in New York, and then the other thing is, what happens now? So you lose your ability to do business in New York. Well, what happens with his creditors? His creditors are going to pull the rug out from underneath him and say, we're not doing business with this guy anymore. He's a proven con man. And so again, the best argument he thought he could muster was, you can't trust what we say in our financial statements. That'd be crazy. That's a total admission that you committed fraud. That's a complete and utter admission. And his point is basically, you can't accuse us of doing fraud if we're telling you our numbers are fraudulent. Oh my God, man. Oh my God. And it's classic Trump. Projection 101. Oh, it's a con. It's a fraud. It's a scam. And it's like, you are literally up on fraud charges right now, bro. Literally. It reminds me of how every rally speech he gives, it's like rigged election, stolen election, all this stuff. When what's the reality? He was trying to rig it. He was trying to steal it. That's the genesis of his crime with the fake elector scheme, the fraudulent electors. Creating a paper trail to try to force Mike Pence to overturn the results of the election in his ceremonial role. So, God, man, look, I'll say it again. He's in trouble, but I'm not done yet because I got more ranting from outside the courtroom. I believe this was the next day. You're going to love this.
In many cases, I paid the money back early. And then I got sued years later by this horrible attorney general, this woman that ran for governor and failed. You know, she did this because she was running for governor. And then she ran and she failed. She had no polls and they forced her out. And she came back and she became attorney general again. And we got stuck with it. So she brought the case under the statute that had never been used for a thing like this before, ever. Where I'm not entitled to a jury. Because if I had a jury, even though it's in New York, and I think I'd be fine with New York, but if I had a jury, we'd win this case very easily. But I don't have a jury.
More on that in a second. More on that in a second. The reason he doesn't have a jury is his own fault. All right, bear with me.
And you see what's happening. It's the railroading. And it's the beginning of communism in our country. This is the beginning of communism.
What are we supposed to do with this guy, man? What are we supposed to do? It's the beginning of communism because Trump committed fraud and was caught doing it and now is going to have a penalty as a result of it. The beginning of communism. The beginning of communism. By the way, what is communism, right? Workers owning the means of production. In what way, shape, or form does this get us closer to workers owning the means of production? Like, look, I'm trying to get into the right-wing brain. When I do that, my reaction is they conflate communism with authoritarianism. Like, those things are one and the same. That's what they think of when they think of communism. And it's like, okay, even if you believe that, you just committed 91 crimes. Like, that's the problem, is the law is being upheld, and for the first time in your life, you're not getting away with your crimes. And for him to fear authoritarianism is rich, because he's the guy who just said repeatedly, suspend the Constitution. He's the guy who wants to put Mark Milley to death, right? He's the guy who's tried to overturn the results of the last election. So he is the authoritarian. He was just talking about we should shoot shoplifters on the spot. So the cop should be judge, jury, and executioner for shoplifters on the spot. That's authoritarian. But he brings up communism. Jesus Christ. Come on, Don. It's the beginning of communism that I committed fraud and got caught doing it. By the way, again, definition of communism, workers owning the means of production. In no way, shape, or form does that get us close to this. But even if we use like a more colloquial understanding of communism, like just think like government. Like, oh, if every industry was nationalized, let's just call that communism for the sake of, you know, laymen out there, right? Even by that definition, I just have to show you this. What percentage of U.S. workers are employed by the government? 14.5%. That is very, very, very far from communism, even the colloquial understanding of it, of like communism equals government. Like if everybody was employed by the government, if everything was nationalized, that would be communism. I don't even know why I do this, to be honest with you guys. Like, why am I taking claims that he makes seriously and like fact-checking them? Because obviously he's just like a ranting, raging lunatic. So why am I even doing it? I'm doing it in the hope that there's some people out there who might come across this and say, oh yeah, when you actually think about what he says, it makes no sense. I know it's a fool's errand maybe, but I gotta try. Hey y'all, do me a favor and like and subscribe. It helps out big time in the algorithm. Click the bell as well for notifications when videos drop, and watch that video on screen right now. You know you want to.